of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today, we meet to resume our study of Canada's clean energy plans in the context of the North American energy transformation. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'll be using these two cards, yellow and red. Yellow is a 30-second warning. Red is time's up. I will now welcome the witnesses who are with us this afternoon. From the Canadian Gas Association, Paul Cheliak, Vice President, Strategy and Delivery. From the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, Yvette Vera Perez, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. From Energy Storage Canada, Justin Ranguni, Executive Director, also by video conference. From Hoverlink Ontario, Inc., Christopher Morgan, Chief Executive Officer and Founder. From Indigenous Clean Energy, James Jenkins, Executive Director by video conference. From the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Matt Wayland, Canadian Director of Government Relations. And from Polaris Strategy and Insight, Dan Wojnielowicz, Principal by video conference. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. We will begin with Mr. Cheliak. You have 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Cheliak. Oh, sorry, Monsieur Samard.
Oui, juste, je veux pas prendre.
Yes, I don't want to take any of the witnesses' time. I just want to very quickly ask you to give us clear instructions, because I don't want what happened Monday to happen again. In other words, there was a colleague who disagreed with what was being said and continuously interrupted on points of order. Now, of course, we can have different ideological views, and that's fine with me, but interrupting a colleague is completely unacceptable, in my opinion. Our job here is to ask questions. We represent the people. We are not here to represent specific economic sectors. I hope everyone remembers that, and I hope that we all have a proper behavior today and we don't interrupt colleagues. I think that should be clear for everybody here.
Dear Samard, and yes, you're correct. Colleagues, I would just ask everybody to allow members to ask questions and get answers from our witnesses who's taken time out of their busy schedules to come today. And we also don't over-talk on each other, because it's very difficult for the interpreters to interpret when we're speaking over each other. So thank you, Monsieur Samard, for reminding us of that. And I agree with what you've said. Mr. Cheliak, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. We've got a busy night, so I'll get started right away. Thanks for the opportunity, Mr. Chair, and great to see all members. By way of background, the Canadian Gas Association represents the delivery side of the natural gas industry in Canada. Our members have about nearly 600,000 kilometres of infrastructure that delivers 40% of Canada's energy needs to about 25 million Canadians. I'll center my remarks on three issues. The first is, can we compete with the United States on clean energy? The second is the scope and implementation of proposed investment tax credits. And the third is an assessment of Canada's clean energy pathways. To my first point, can Canada position itself to compete with the U.S. in the race for clean energy capital? The answer is yes, but as a nation, we have work to do. We believe Canada remains at a disadvantage due to our current framework for energy project evaluation. We should be laser focused as a nation on determining how we can improve our agility and our responsiveness to advancing all clean energy projects. Now, this is a complex issue. However, it is not insurmountable. For example, the United States Fiscal Responsibility Act has set a 2-year environmental review timeframe for all projects. Further, the Act requires that all environmental impact statements be no longer than 150 pages. Therefore, we recommend Canada undertake a review of its energy project approvals process with a goal in mind of 2 years or less for all projects. On the second point regarding the scope of ITCs or investment tax credits, we support ITCs. It opens the door for industry to demonstrate leadership and to pick projects that work best for them. Further, they offer a more expedited approach when compared to traditional application-based funding programs. We offer the following in terms of the current regime on ITCs. First, on hydrogen, we include a reference to the scope of the ITC. We wish to have pyrolysis, methane pyrolysis, included in the scope of the proposed hydrogen ITC. Methane pyrolysis can leverage one of Canada's key strategic energy assets, that is natural gas. Second, with respect to the need for a biofuel investment tax credit, there currently is not one. We are recommending one. Specifically for us, that means the inclusion of renewable natural gas in a proposed biofuels investment tax credit. Third, and perhaps most importantly, we must finalize these investment tax credits. We need to bring forward the legislation to solidify them and give market participants the confidence they need to undertake the project investments they have. Therefore, we recommend Canada introduce hydrogen and biofuel IT legislation on or before Budget 2024, with a priority in the fall economic statement of this year. The third area I'll speak to is Canada's clean energy pathways. Over the last 18 months, many jurisdictions in Canada have been public about looming or existing electricity supply shortages or challenges with supply chain issues. This is a very different situation than we were in just 5 years ago, when power supply was abundant and forecast to remain that way. This historic abundance led to forecasts and policies aimed at leveraging ever-increasing supplies of electricity. This is changing fast, however. In contrast, Canada produced and consumed record volumes of natural gas, hydrogen, and renewable natural gas in 2022, and 2023 looks to be on par for another record year. Add all of this to the changing geopolitical realities, rising interest rates, and affordability issues, and we're left asking questions about our direction on clean energy. Are the assumptions made 5 years ago still valid today? Do we have all the supply of power that we thought we would need to do what we wanted to do? Can we better leverage other resources, such as natural gas, as exports of LNG to our allies? These important questions deserve a thoughtful assessment. We recommend that industry and government develop Clean Energy Pathways report that examines the costs and feasibilities of various low-emission pathways under today's market realities, including gas, liquids, and electricity. In summary, Canada is a nation blessed with vast energy resources that are the envy of the world. Let's continue to collectively raise the bar on how we produce, deliver, export, and use the energy sources we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chilyak. We'll now go to Yvette Vera-Perez from the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation to speak today. My name is Yvette Vera-Perez. I'm the President and CEO at the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, CHFCA. We are the national voice for the hydrogen sector in Canada, representing approximately 200 companies across the hydrogen value chain. Canada has always been at the cutting edge of the global hydrogen industry, from the creation of the first electrolyzer over a century ago to the development of a fuel cell cluster with companies that sell their products in 42 countries. Despite our past leadership, building a hydrogen industry in the scale needed requires calculated yet rapid responses. Canada has announced several tax incentives, including the Clean Hydrogen Investment Tax Credit, which will help propel the industry to the next level. However, to foster the growth of Canada's hydrogen industry, remain competitive in a new North American landscape, and to ensure we meet our ambitious goals, including the government's 2025 hydrogen export targets, 2030 emission reduction objectives, and 2035 transportation decarbonization aims, it is imperative to provide additional direct support to the sector. Earlier this month, CHFCA members visited Ottawa and met with some of the members of this panel, where we made several recommendations to officials, some of which I bring here today. First, establish a Canadian Hydrogen Office. This office would centralize efforts related to hydrogen projects, ensuring efficient program management and delivery. It would also serve as a valuable resource for business navigating regulatory and programming channels, facilitating the advancement of new projects. Other countries' successful hydrogen office models include Germany, the US, and Chile. Second, dedicate funding to hydrogen development. While existing clean energy funding programs are valuable, we recommend that the government dedicate funding programs to advance Canada's hydrogen industry. This would assist in leveling the playing field for smaller producers and normalize competition between the nascent hydrogen industry and more established ones. As an example, the U.S. just announced a $7 billion in bipartisan funding to support 7 hydrogen hubs. It is estimated that this injection of capital will unlock $40 billion in private sector investments. Third, streamline regulatory processes. Efficient regulatory processes are essential for the development of clean energy projects. The government should explore avenues to streamline regulations and align standards with key jurisdictions like the US and the EU. While doing so, it is imperative to respect the rights of Indigenous communities and develop truly meaningful and impactful partnerships. And finally, timely implementation of tax measures, as Paul just said. The government must quickly implement tax measures that support the hydrogen industry. Investment tax credits, such as the Clean Hydrogen ITC, offer substantial capex incentives for low-emission hydrogen production. Accelerating the implementation of such measures will enhance Canadian competitiveness and encourage the adoption of clean hydrogen production. Specifically regarding the Clean Hydrogen ITC, CHFCA recommends that the government include all existing and emerging clean hydrogen production pathways as eligible for the ITC, and Paul mentioned pyrolysis of methane, and apply the same principle to hydrogen carriers such as ammonia and others. Make grid-connected electrolysis projects eligible for a minimum of 30% ITC so that we can help kick off the sector. Seamlessly connect tax credits by drawing a clear boundary between them and ensuring the equipment would be eligible under one or another investment tax credit. Provide clarity on the specific tax credit eligibility of common infrastructure not directly linked to the production of hydrogen or ammonia, but necessary for storing and transporting hydrogen. And allow eligibility of all clean hydrogen production facility equipment, as well as design, engineering, project management, construction, and civil capital costs. So in conclusion, Canada's hydrogen industry shows great promise, yet we must now shift from potential into action. The sector can significantly cut emissions, create jobs, and drive innovation, but it requires tangible government support. By implementing these strategies, Canada can lead not only in the North American landscape, but globally. And with that, I thank you, and I look forward to the question session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your opening statement, Ms. Vera Perez. We'll now go to Mr. Justin Ranguni from Energy Storage Canada. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having me here today. I am Justin Ranguni, the Executive Director of Energy Storage Canada. Energy Storage Canada is a not-for-profit organization serving as Canada's national trade association dedicated exclusively to advancing the growth and market development of the energy storage sector. Our primary goal is to leverage the diverse abilities of all types and all durations of energy storage to accelerate Canada's ongoing energy transition and support the country's clean tech economy through advocacy, education, collaboration, and research. This technology-agnostic approach has allowed us to assemble a broad membership of more than 90 organizations and stakeholders that represent the complete value chain of Canada's energy storage industry. As you are likely aware, energy storage encompasses any technology or process capable of capturing surplus energy when it is not needed and storing it for later use, releasing it as is required. These technologies include batteries of various chemistries, such as lithium, zinc, and vanadium, as well as mechanical methods like compressed air, flywheels, electrolyzers, pumps, storage, and thermal solutions, employing mediums like molten salts. Depending on a specific technology employed, storage can offer a range of benefits to the grid, spanning from real-time operations to support lasting weeks or even months. Since assuming this role in 2019, I have witnessed a remarkable transformation in Canada's energy storage sector. My initial mandate was to convince decision makers that energy storage is a ready technology with immense potential that extends beyond pilots. Today, we are witnessing energy storage resources being procured and deployed across the country. From Ontario recently hosting the largest energy storage procurement in Canadian history, Alberta energizing over 100 megawatts of energy storage capacity, and other provinces like Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, amongst others, setting ambitious targets for energy storage. The growing resonance of energy storage is grounded in the profound shifts occurring in electricity supply, as well as evolving demands. Grid operators now require additional tools to manage the transformation to a decarbonized, electrified grid effectively, and energy storage resources of all durations not only enhance the utility and efficiency of existing assets, but also provide versatility for the system by providing a spectrum of grid services, reliability, and affordability. In fact, in the most recent Ontario capacity procurement, energy storage resources came in at a lower cost than the procured natural gas projects. Energy storage contributes to decarbonization initiatives by enhancing the efficient utilization of clean energy assets already integrated into the grid, including wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear power. This, in turn, further reduces dependence on carbon-intensive fuel sources. Energy Storage undertook a commission report last year examining the amount of energy storage needed to align with the government's ambitious 2035 net zero goals. The findings of the report indicated that a minimum range of 8 to 12 gigawatts of storage would be necessary to achieve this goal. The United States Inflation Reduction Act has played a pivotal role in fueling remarkable growth within their energy storage sector, resulting in record-breaking new capacity installations during the second quarter of 2023. Now, the importance of finalizing details surrounding Canada's investment tax credits, therefore, cannot be overemphasized. The gravitational pull of the IRA within the clean energy sector is tangible, and it is imperative for Canada to recognize that these policy instruments within Canada exist within a global competitive environment where both time and resources are scarce, and we must keep pace with global efforts. Better yet, if Canada can take a leadership role. In the immediate, Canadian project developers find themselves in a situation where they must fight for limited financial investments, and any financing allocated to the U.S. projects due to uncertainties in the market, delays, or exacerbates policies results in challenges to the system. Now, shifting our focus to long-duration energy storage, which are technologies can store for weeks, months, or even seasons, LDES technologies can play a pivotal role in advancing decarbonization efforts, significantly reducing reliance on peaking fossil fuel generation by storing clean electricity for extended periods. In the United States, the Department of Energy introduced the Liftoff Report, aimed at facilitating market and regulatory mechanisms while promoting cost reductions for LDES technologies. And we can strongly encourage the federal government to take a similar approach and explore ways to enhance LDES technologies within Canada, including an ITC for long-duration energy storage, along the lines of similar tools like carbon capture storage at 50%. And we are currently engaging in a report that we're happy to share with you on the value proposition for LDES. So thank you for the opportunity to address the Standing Committee, as we believe energy storage technologies of all types and durations is critical to Canada's energy transition.
Thank you, Mr. Ranguni, for your opening statements. I would now like to go to Christopher Morgan from Hoverlink Ontario Incorporated for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you again for inviting me back. I was here a year ago for a similar standing committee. I'm different from a lot of the witnesses here today because I rely on components that they're going to make for the public-private system of transportation that we've created in Ontario. And as a geologist, as an engineer, I question a lot of things, and in our path, it's been 12 years of development to this stage. So when you sent that letter to me that Patrick sent to me and described what we needed to talk about here today, for me, I looked at it as there's a number of silos that needed to be crossed, and number one is when we looked at what we needed to build the right hovercraft and move people in a sustainable manner, sustainability to me is more than net zero. It's the amount of havoc we wreak on the environment to go complete cycle. So when someone asks me, what kind of wind generation are you using? We're using Typhoon because there are studies that show that the current systems that we have, their noise resonance disturbs bee populations to death. It affects people who live within half a kilometer. There have been federal studies that have somehow disappeared that we need to address. Then we talk about lithium. Elon Musk, great guy. But how do we deal with the lithium that's spent? Have we talked about how much energy has been used to lift the lithium out of the ground? And some of the energy to just produce enough lithium to do one car. That's a concern for me. So what we've done is we've designed something that we're building the first terminals in the world off the grid. We've designed a craft that will be something that's important. I use biodiesel fuel. I use solar-powered panels. We use reverse osmosis and water catchment off our structures. So it's about taking all the great things we have, but also manage the way that they're leaving us behind. We say it's, we're global warming. It needs to be deeper than that. It needs to be, this planet will survive whether we're here or not. It's whether we're going to survive here. And we're the only species that seems to be destroying enemies we don't see, that they're not even enemies. They're natural creatures. So again, for me, it's whatever paths we do, we need to understand what the full life cycle is, 0 to 0. And as well, then you talk about government funding and different bits and pieces. For huge companies, that's great, but you're asking a lot of companies to create a lot of new technology, and they're startups. So one of their hurdles in startups for a lot of companies is they'll say, well, we don't really have funding for startups in a proper manner. And then when you have private investors, they say, what's the government kicking in? And when you see the government, they say, what's the private investor? So you're in a stalemate. So I'm your litmus test for all the details you're trying to solve today. And there's enough mine management with all these corporations to figure it out. I'm using biodiesel with a DEF injector system. We're 1.1% of emissions left. And so it's just taking that technology and understanding how we manage and how we store it. And storage is huge because if we have electrical panels on the roofs and we need to store that. So for me, I'm a catalyst of all these great people here today, but we need to be smart about it and manage it in the right way. And that's really what I'm here to do is answer. And I can tell you my path because I've been doing this for 12 years and a lot of time here in Ottawa. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan, for your opening statement. We'll now go to Indigenous Clean Energy, Mr. James Jenkins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak to the committee. I'm the Executive Director of Indigenous Clean Energy. We are a not-for-profit that promotes the leadership and capacity with Indigenous businesses and communities to participate in the clean energy transition. And today, our participants, our mentors, our entire network spans over 1,000 individuals that are practitioners that are Indigenous and Indigenous communities and businesses working on clean energy projects. So the first thing I'll talk about is the critical role that Indigenous communities and businesses play in clean energy today. I'll talk a bit about the opportunities that present themselves in the North American context, and then I'll end by suggesting some next steps that the federal government could look at moving forward. So today, clean energy projects that are either owned, co-owned, or have Indigenous participation represent over 20% of Canada's total electrical generation today. So it's a major portion of our electrical generation network, and we've seen incredible growth. Since 2019, the amount of medium to large projects, so 1 megawatt or more with Indigenous participation, has grown by almost 40%, from under 200 projects in 2019 to today over 270. And these are projects with Indigenous participation and that are over 1 megawatt. Indigenous people also play an important role as employees in the minerals industry, representing 12% of that labor sector. And Indigenous organizations are now players in electricity transmission, housing and infrastructure efficiency, and advanced clean energy technologies. The other benefit for communities is that collectively, the net revenue for communities represents about $400 million annually, and that money is being reinvested into economic development and infrastructure and other services in communities. So I'll talk a bit about the opportunities moving forward. So most provinces and territories are experiencing on average about 2% increased electricity demand compounded each year. So those provinces and territories and utilities within them are making major strides to expand their electricity generation. And many of them have incorporated different mechanisms to promote Indigenous participation in those projects. And we've seen to date Indigenous leadership being critical to see that participation have success on these projects moving forward. So there are some examples in terms of some of the goals to have positive union participation in these projects. I would point to the Gordie Howe Bridge and another sector as being a good example of unions participating where we saw significant Indigenous labor in that project. And I would stress that an important component in these projects is the secondary service industry and the growing role of Indigenous entrepreneurship, as we see more small and medium-sized Indigenous businesses providing support services to new clean energy projects. And that is where we have seen more Indigenous labor moving into the workforce, potentially into unions as well. But there are a number of barriers for Indigenous peoples to move into those union roles. We're seeing entrepreneurship and defined procurement. And Gordie Howe is one federal example of that, but there are many examples across utilities across the country of procurement mechanisms that have helped promote Indigenous participation. I also just want to point to several initiatives that have some history now between U.S. tribes and Indigenous communities in Canada to promote cross-border trade, and clean energy has been an area of discussion for quite some time. So there is an appetite for U.S. tribal investment in Canadian clean energy and a real synergy because these business partnerships exist and there's that interest in that. Two groups would be the Jay Treaty Border Alliance, another the Potawatomi Gathering, where we see these discussions, and there could be increased federal support through emissions orders or other possible ways to limit the impacts of tariffs and other challenges to that participation. And I'll just end with some suggestions for the federal government on taking action. We've seen major strong Indigenous clean energy programming coming from Natural Resources Canada, ISC, CERNAC, Environment and Climate Change, and also CMHC has played a major role. So what we are suggesting is a rapid development of a new fund to deal with clean energy retrofits. We see the demand side as being incredibly important to meet targets. Also increased capacity to equip Indigenous leaders, renewal of Indigenous Services Clean Energy funding within Strategic Partnerships Initiative, and consideration of a major new strategic fund. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Matt Wayland from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members, fellow witnesses, and guests. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to present here today on the study in Canada's clean energy plans in the context of North American energy transformation. As mentioned, I'm here today presenting on behalf of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, or IBEW. The IBEW represents 820,000 active and retired members throughout North America and almost 70,000 here in Canada. We are the largest and longest-standing electrical workers union in the world, and proud of it. We represent workers in many different industries, including construction, utilities, mining, and manufacturing, and much, much more. It is IBEW's highly skilled members that build, operate, and maintain Canada's critical energy and electrical systems from coast to coast to coast. Canada, and North America for that matter, is at a critical juncture when it comes to clean energy and the path going forward. We are known for our abundance of natural resources and our nation's clean electricity system. But we know we still have a long way to go, as others have mentioned, and the demand we are facing for more clean electricity is massive, but achievable. Just to highlight how big the demand will be, a 2022 report from the Canadian Climate Institute titled The Big Switch found that Canada would need to double or triple the size of our generation and transmission capacity by 2050 in order to meet the demand and our net zero goals. This is true not just for Canada, but for all of North America. The Biden administration is aware of these challenges, and they've laid out an aggressive plan to attract and build large-scale investments in the clean energy sector, the likes we haven't seen in a generation. With the passing of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS Act, and of course the Inflation Reduction Act, which we've heard about today, the U.S. has created the environment to attract large-scale investments and projects in the clean energy sector, while providing substantial incentives to ensure that these jobs are good-paying union jobs for American workers. The IBEW knows our government was paying close attention to the aggressive plan the Biden administration was undertaking, but businesses, investors, and union workers were also paying attention. For Canada to remain competitive, we need a similar plan to ensure that we could attract comparable investments for large-scale projects right across our country and not be left behind. Canada's ITCs, highlighted in the Fall Economic Statement of 2022 and expanded upon in Budget 2023, were a step in the right direction and welcomed by us. However, we believe they do not go quite far enough. For example, the Biden administration's investment tax credits are 30% when labor provisions are met and only 6% when labor provisions are not met, meaning those tax incentives are 5 times larger for projects that pay workers a prevailing wage, provide apprenticeship opportunities for young workers and new workers in their jurisdiction. Similarly, Canada's labor requirements in ITCs also include ensuring workers are paid a prevailing wage and that apprenticeship opportunities are being created on these projects. This is the right thing to do and certainly welcomed by the IBEW. In order to receive the full tax credit here, these labor requirements will need to be met. If they are not met, ITCs in Canada will only be reduced by 10 percentage points, which is a big difference compared to the U.S. counterparts. Now, I've already highlighted what the future demand for clean electricity, energy and electricity will be. And as Canadians, we need to ensure that we can capitalize on this while paying the workers who build these projects good union wages, but also creating apprenticeship opportunities to help provide a stable, skilled trades workforce into the future. In addition to increasing our generation and transmission capacity, we also have opportunities to provide our traditional carbon-intensive industries such as steel, aluminum, cement, and fertilizer to be produced using cleaner energy sources, making them greener and more sought after in global markets, which can provide stability for those Canadian industries and, of course, the Canadian workers that support them. Another program I'd like to highlight under the Biden administration, which also happened to be one of the recommendations in the final report by the Task Force on Just Transition and for Canadian coal power workers and communities, that recommendation for the task force was to identify, prioritize, and fund local infrastructure projects in affected coal communities. In April of this year, the Biden administration announced they will allow developers of clean energy projects and facilities to take advantage of billions in bonuses on top of the investment and production tax credits through the IRA for locating projects in what they refer to as an energy community. These bonuses will incentivize more clean energy investment in energy communities, particularly coal communities. This will also help provide workers and those communities most affected to ensure new industries are attracted to those areas and become a source of good-paying union jobs for workers. To wrap up my comments, I want to share a quote from Budget 2023, which I believe that all Canadians, regardless of our political stripe or which region of the country we live in, should realize. Underinvestment in Canada's electrical grid today would risk our ability to power our economy and deliver cleaner, cheaper energy to Canadians. It would hamstring Canada's electricity-intensive manufacturing sector and impede the development of new electricity-intensive sectors such as hydrogen that can be a source of good middle-class jobs for generations to come. So on behalf of our almost 70,000 IBEW members across Canada, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to provide the committee with our input, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wayland. We'll now go to Dan Vinovich from Polaris Strategy and Insight. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the invitation to appear today. My name is Dan Vinolovich. I'm the principal of Polaris Strategy and Insight, an energy and climate advisory firm, and I'm joining you from the unceded Coast Salish territory, specifically that of the Lekwungen and Wasanich-speaking peoples. My comments today center on the need to ensure that policymaking is grounded in credible analysis and an understanding that navigating this transition requires that we keep our eyes on the road ahead, not fixed on the rearview mirror. Some argue that the transition to clean energy will be slow. They would prefer that policymakers focus on enabling increased production and use of Canada's oil and gas resources, citing ever-growing global demand. But increasingly, Energy analysts are forecasting a future based on current market trends that paints a very different picture with sweeping implications for Canada. I'd like to draw your attention to a forecast released last week by DNV. They are global experts in assurance and risk management. And as they put it, unlike most energy forecasters, DNV does not develop scenarios. Our analysis produces a single best estimate forecast of the energy future. In this best estimate forecast, they foresee that coal, oil, and gas will each begin an inescapable decline before the end of this decade. Particularly material for Canada are the implications for oil and gas. Oil demand tips from growth to decline in 2027 as electrification of road transport accelerates. Global demand for gas also peaks in 2027, plateaus for a decade, and then declines. But it's their forecast specifically from North American oil and gas production that is particularly noteworthy, and in stark contrast to what you might hear about on the news or as members of this committee. North American gas production peaks in the 2020s and declines to 2030 and beyond. Liquefaction capacity to produce LNG in North America is forecast to peak in 2030 and plateau. North American oil is foreseen plateauing at around 17 million barrels per day until 2024, then declines to just 7 million barrels per day in 2050. These declines would be even faster and steeper in net zero scenarios, whether they're the net zero scenarios that are forecast by DNV, the International Energy Agency, Shell, BP, or many others. A passage of dialogue from Ernest Hemingway's 1926 novel, The Sun Also Rises, seems particularly relevant to this situation. How did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said, gradually and then suddenly. The flip side to this is the extent to which deployment of clean energy is and will continue to accelerate. The key technologies for achieving net zero, solar, wind, batteries, heat pumps, green hydrogen, are not and will not grow on a linear basis, but are following an S-shaped exponential curve driven by self-reinforcing feedback loops that accelerate both their cost reductions and ultimately their scaling. The risk to Canada then is that we continue to pay short shrift to the opportunities at hand, opportunities in critical minerals, batteries and other technologies, and clean and renewable electricity, in favor of trying to prop up the viability of our oil and gas sector, that we focus on the sunset rather than the sunrise. There's a very real opportunity cost when it comes to the efforts of policymakers and the spending of public dollars, neither of which are limitless. To achieve net zero, we need to target public policy and spending to help shift capital from fossil fuel to clean energy investments and achieve a ratio of $4 invested in clean energy for every dollar invested in fossil fuels in this decade. The key takeaways for the committee to consider are, first, that we need to prepare for a net zero future in which the oil and gas sector will not be growing, and proactively manage the implications for communities, workers, and for government revenue, while also ensuring that the sector responsibly reduces its emissions and manages its growing environmental liabilities. Second, that we need to prepare and position for a future that includes abundant opportunities to produce, refine, use, and ultimately recycle our critical minerals and clean energy technologies, to harness our clean and renewable energy resources to power this growth, and to leverage our skilled workforce, innovators, and entrepreneurs. And third, that we don't attempt or aspire to simply mirror the IRA and our American neighbors, but that we surgically select those sectors and opportunities in which Canada can compete and win throughout the energy transition. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vinelovich, for your testimony. Colleagues, we'll now move to our first round, and we'll only get one round in today for 5 minutes each, so we can finish on time. So I'll move to Shannon Stubbs from the Conservative Party of Canada. Ma'am, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses today. Conservatives certainly will cut red tape, make Canada competitive again, and ensure that both traditional and clean energy development can actually happen in this country and we can export that to the world. Chair, I'm going to use my time to talk about the severe geopolitical consequences of the NDP Liberals' 8 years of anti-energy, anti-private sector, anti-development policies that have made Canada uncompetitive. It is relative to the motion that I put on notice on Friday, October 13th. It is urgent, and the reason I am raising it today I hope to make the case about in the next few minutes. The reality is this, and this is why it is so timely. Our G7 partner, France, signed an LNG deal with Qatar for 27 years last week. Last year, Germany signed a deal with Qatar for LNG after they asked for Canadian LNG, and the Prime Minister said there was no business case. Germany asked for that to end their energy independence on Putin. This is important because of the escalating conflict in the Middle East, because Qatar houses the head of Hamas, which is currently attacking Israel and wreaking havoc on innocent people throughout the Middle East. This is the truth. It's undeniable now that the Liberal government's 8 years of anti-energy, anti-private sector, anti-development policies enrich the backers of Hamas, the sadistic terrorist organization impacting the whole world right now. I am sure that this is an urgent and top priority to every member of the Natural Resources Committee right now. Canada is the 5th largest producer of natural gas in the world, with 71 trillion cubic feet underneath, the 17th largest proven reserves globally. After 8 years of Justin Trudeau, 18 LNG proposals were made. Only 0 have actually been built. Canada exports 0 LNG. Only 1 is under construction, which was approved previously by the Conservative government just before the Liberals took office. So 18 proposals, only 1 on its way to being built, no potential for exports until the next few years. That is the real severe geopolitical and economic consequences of 8 years of anti-energy, anti-development, anti-private sector policies. And today, Canada, the situation that this Prime Minister has created is G7 allies, France and Germany, are signing a deal with Qatar that's hiding the head of Hamas. And Japan is also in talks with Qatar, a counterbalance to a different hostile state regime to Canada and to the free world. So again, let us be clear, every single member of Parliament on this committee, and for all Canadians, after 8 years of this government, of these policies, 0 LNG terminals to export from Canada have been built. But allies are buying up big from the regime that houses the head of Hamas right now, that houses terrorists right now. So I move that given the fact that Qatar has signed a liquefied natural gas deal with France for 27 years for 3.5 million tons per annum MTPA, and given the fact that Qatar has signed an LNG deal with Germany for 15 years for 2 MTPA, and given the fact that the German Chancellor called on Canada for more LNG, saying, as Germany is moving away from Russian energy at warp speed, Canada is our partner of choice. This means increasing our LNG imports. We hope that Canadian LNG will play a major role in this. And given the fact that when the current Liberal Prime Minister took office, there were 18 LNG terminals proposed, and after 8 years of his government, 0 have been completed, the committee call on the House to denounce the regulatory regime established by this government that has not completed not a single solitary LNG export terminal from Canada. We only have 1 import facility, not a single solitary export LNG terminal from Canada, and that this committee report to the House its opinion that Canada should do everything it can to export its clean energy to the world. I ask today that this committee see the urgency, the urgent and severe consequences of 8 years of their anti-energy, anti-development, anti-Canada policy agenda, and the consequences of our allies enriching a country that houses the head of Hamas right now. I urge all the members of this committee, for the sake of our country and for our allies, to vote, debate, and vote in favor of this motion right now.
Yes, we have a speaker's list, Mr. Angus. We have Mr. Patzer, then yourself. Then Mr. Boyce. And then Monsieur Simard. And then Mr. Brusen.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank my colleague for moving this motion because Yeah, I mean, given all the events that have gone along around the world the last couple of weeks here, I think this is of utmost importance, and I think it's of a sense of urgency that I think everyone around this table would agree that needs to be met. It's definitely within the purview of our committee as it's dealing with the development of natural resources within our country. It's definitely federal policy that's been set that has prevented a lot of this. It's been decisions at the federal level that have blocked and stopped LNG production in Canada for the last 8 years. And then we got to look at it. Not only do we have the conflict that's going on, right? And my colleague laid that out very, very well. But let's also look at, even in the context of the study that we have here today, right? Let's look at that context as well. We know what the rest of the world is looking for. They're looking for clean, reliable energy. We know that Canada has that. We produce that. We've heard from witnesses previously that Canada, our grid is already 84% non-emitting or renewable. The Americans are only 40%. The rest of the world would love to have what we already have, right? So, and we have this resource that's just sitting here that they're looking for so they can get to a place where we already at. So why we're not developing it and getting it out there to these folks is absolutely beyond me. And I think getting to this motion as quickly as we possibly can, and I think it's of complete importance, but again, let's get back to the conflict at hand here right now. And we're talking about the fact that a country that is housing terrorists, housing the head of Hamas, is the one who is going to be providing the world with LNG. And the Prime Minister said there was no business case. Well, I guess what? Qatar found a business case, and they are using it to fund terrorism. So that's what we're faced with. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're dealing with here now. And that's why this motion, I think, is of utmost importance that we need to be dealing with it.
Gross, so maybe you can talk about the urgency.
Yeah, so now we got people saying that this is gross. Yeah. Well, this is not gross. This is urgent. It's gross that there's no development being done on this.
Yeah.
And that we're now in the situation where people are going to a country that houses terrorists.
Allies.
That's what's gross. That's truly what's gross.
The other countries thought there was a business case.
It's clearly a business case. So why we're not trying to figure out how we can fill the needs of that business case. That's what this is about. We have the potential. There's 18 proposed. And after 8 years, we're at 0. So why we're not prioritizing this, again, given what's going on around the world, and extends beyond just what's going on in Israel right now. I mean, that's the issue of the day. That's very pertinent. But let's look at what's going on with the rest of Europe right now, with the invasion of the Ukraine, and the way Russia's been with the energy markets across Europe. That's why Germany came here in the first place. That's why France came to us. That's why Japan has come to us. And now here we are. So I hope that the committee will take this motion, look at it with the urgency that it needs, that it deserves. You know, it's too bad that we have to wait for something to happen in the world, like has happened in multiple countries now, for this to happen, for us to get to the point where we need to start to get the rest of the committee to take us with the urgency. Conservatives always had a sense of urgency around getting our resources to market. We've always prioritized this. I hope that the rest of the committee will do it now. But if that's what it takes is global conflict for them to get on board with it, well, I guess let's go. Let's go.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. We'll go to Mr. Angus.
First of all, I'd like to deeply apologize to our witnesses who came in here with good faith about a very serious issue about our future. I'd also like to apologize for anybody out there who thinks that the Parliament of Canada would use the horrific kidnapping of hostages in Israel in order to promote selling oil and gas. I've seen a lot of reprehensible exploitation in my many years of Parliament, but I think that that's probably one of the most low-down, ugly things I've witnessed. And so to attempt to use the horrific crimes that have been committed as a reason to promote oil and gas, I'm just ashamed to sit here, so I vote that we move to adjourn this debate. It's non-debatable.
It's not a debatable motion, so it goes right to a vote, Mr. Angus. So to adjourn the debate, recorded. Can we get recorded division? Okay.
Ms. DeBruzen.
I support adjournment, yes.
Mr. Blois. Madame Lapointe.
Pour.
Mr. Sobara.
Adjourn, please.
Mr. McDonald. Mr. Dreeshen. Mr. Falk. Mr. Patzer.
Against.
Ms. Stubbs.
For the public interest of Canada and for the free world, against.
Monsieur Simard.
Pour.
Mr. Angus.
Yes.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4, 4. Back to her.
Thank you, colleagues. We'll go now back to Monsieur Sobera for your rounds of questioning.
Sorry, point of order. Being that that cut into our time, do we have to now cut, being that the Conservatives ignored the understanding, do we have to cut down our time so that everyone gets a chance to ask questions?
That's up to you, colleagues. We can have just finish a full round each if we can focus on doing that, if that's fine with everybody. 5 minutes each and wrap it up.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome witnesses, both virtually and here in person. I just want to say it's great to be on this committee, obviously, and to be looking at this study. I did want to go to Energy Storage Association and Mr. Rangooni. Justin, you and I have spoken about energy storage and the importance of traditionally. You had the three pillars of generation, transmission, and distribution, and now you have this fourth pillar, what I would call in the energy business or the energy sector, which is distribution. We in the budget 23 have introduced a 30% investment ITC investment tax credit. So I wondered if you could provide an update on, first of all, some of the great innovation that's occurring within the energy storage sector here in Ontario and in Canada, of course, and also how important that the ITC be put in place for energy storage and the growth thereof.
Great. Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, the ITC is significant, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, to keep pace with what's happening in the United States. Really, well, that has led to incredible growth in the energy storage sector, and really finalizing the legislation on the ITC will be of utmost importance, especially as these procurements, as these provinces across the country are starting to really invest in energy storage. Again, Ontario had the largest energy storage procurement in Canadian history. Alberta has over 100 megawatts energized. Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, British Columbia. These are all energy storage projects. Again, short duration batteries that will need the certainty on the ITC. So let's get that legislation passed because it's such a big piece that's going to keep us, the Canadian market, in competition with the U.S. market.
And Mr. Rangooni, the other thing I keep thinking about is going to be the need, and in terms of the growth for clean electricity. We know about 84% of the electrical grid in Canada currently is non-GHG emitting, but at the same time, what's even more important, or I would say as important, is that the capacity or baseload capacity on electrical generation here in Canada is going to need to grow. And one of those components is going to be the energy storage, where you have to meet, your supply-demand changes. Can energy storage innovation is going to be able to be a large component of that?
Definitely, and thank you for the question. So what we're seeing right now is with short-term duration kind of lithium batteries, that's being used now to optimize what you already have on the grid to keep the lights on, reliability, and for affordability reasons. As you're going into the future, into the 2030s, and if you're looking how you're going to really decarbonize the entire grid, really reduce the reliance on peaking fossil fuels, you're going to start to look at what we mentioned, long-duration energy storage technologies. And that's really something key that this committee can really look at.
Thank you. I want to go to Ms. Vera Perez. I just returned from a trip in Europe, and I was in Germany. We did meet with some of the folks there, and hydrogen is a big focus for the German government, the German sector. Can you speak to where we are in Canada in hydrogen globally, what we need to improve on, where our strengths are on that? And I think there's different types of hydrogen, green, blue, and so forth. So some color there would be great.
So yeah, this is a general question. Thank you for the question. So feel free to guide me. I was in Germany in March as well, as part of Canadian delegation. There's a strong desire from the EU, not only Germany, Belgium, and other countries to secure hydrogen from Canada. Canadian hydrogen can be very competitive. I can move on to talk about what we would need to make it more competitive, but geographically, we're very well located, even compared to the Gulf of Mexico. Where we're at, many projects in the Atlantic provinces are moving along. Many projects in Alberta are moving along. So those are the two major colors, if you will. I prefer to speak about carbon intensity because there are many colors now, and it makes it
Ms. Vera Perez,
confusing.
I just want to say thank you. I do believe we're out of time, so I just want to say thank you, and I will definitely follow up online via email with some further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Samard from the Bloc Québécois. You have 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Vera Perez. We met in March in Berlin. And at first glance, I didn't have a very critical view on hydrogen, but after several discussions that I've had, I feel like our capacity to export hydrogen is not as high as we believe, especially for Germans. What I understood after our discussions in Berlin is that the Germans are really looking for green hydrogen, and the conclusion was that the technical risk to produce green hydrogen was too high for us to truly think that we would be able to produce a high volume of green hydrogen in the near future. So according to the people I was speaking to, the risk was too high to produce a high volume of green hydrogen and export it. So that leads me to conclude that our production of hydrogen is more for the domestic market and not really for the export market. So maybe you could speak to that and talk about the potential for selling hydrogen outside of Canada.
Thank you for the question, and yes, it was a pleasure to meet you in person in Germany. So both uses are quite important to the Canadian economy. In fact, anchor projects at home are really important to develop the ecosystem, to develop the experiences and the learnings from those projects. Like what you say, there's always that technical aspect. It creates domestic jobs. It also helps de-risk any export commitments. So the domestic market and the export market can coexist. Large volumes of hydrogen have already been shipped from Australia, are being shipped. Hydrogen is currently being shipped as ammonia. The logistic of moving ammonia is well known, it's not new. And there are also other carriers being explored, like liquid organic hydrogen, etc., and other carriers, like you could think methanol, for example. I think Canada is well positioned to develop large volumes of hydrogen for exports. Now, when you start production, you increase your capacity in a staggered manner. You don't just turn on the tap today and you have maximum capacity. But absolutely, the domestic market is very important, and the development of transition industrial processes, transitioning fleet, etc., is something that, including the projects in the Atlantic provinces, are looking at as well.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Perez.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Quick question, and I apologize for my pronunciation, Mr. Velinovic. I hope I've pronounced it correctly. If I understood what you said correctly, you believe that Canada should invest more in the gas and oil sector. You think we should invest more in that than in clean energy? And then by 2035, 84 billion will be invested to support the gas and oil sector and reduce its carbon footprint. So do you not believe we should concentrate on clean energy? I'm talking about wind energy, solar. Do you believe that Canada is making enough efforts to support those clean energies?
My point was, in fact, that we do need to be emphasizing the focus on opportunities in clean energy and spend much less time and put much less attention and focus and resources towards trying to clean up a sector that has limited growth potential. In fact, it's likely to peak and go into a period of decline. That brings with it the risk of stranded assets and having put money into things that are no longer economically viable. So to the contrary, we need to really emphasize looking at what are the opportunities for Canada where we can compete in the clean energy economy and focus our policymaking and our public resources to those opportunities.
Merci.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Ms. Trengus for the final 5 minutes. Ms. Trengus.
Thank you, and to all our witnesses, I wish we had time to hear from all of you because there's such important points of view being brought forward. Mr. Wayland, I come from a hard rock mining town. When we lost every single silver mining job and we lost every iron ore job, they gave us a manpower center. And they told us they were going to retrain all our workers, and that was a way of telling us they were turning out the lights, and they did. And our community never recovered. We lost 4,000 jobs in Elliott Lake. They made lots of promises. But what was different then was they said there was no future for our hard rock miners, our trained employees. There seems to be, this is a different kind of world we're dealing with. It's not just that we can be moving from something, we need to move to something. How important is it that we get our act together very quickly now so that the trained workers that we have and the trained workers you represent are able to make the most of this transition that is happening right now?
Thank you for your question. That is what we face, and workers, I've spoke to my members across the country, whether it's in the oil and gas sector or the coal sector, and they're concerned about that exact example. I come from a manufacturing town of auto sector, and everything has left. So the intention is to make sure these workers aren't going to a manpower center or that, and going from good paying jobs to data entry jobs, or to something that we want to make sure they have good paying jobs to go to, that there actually is a good job to go to. Make sure that the training requirements or upskilling if they need, or those skills are transferable and they just need to ensure that there's a new place to go. And part of my comments was around the energy communities, and making sure if we can put target or bonuses in those areas to attract businesses where, for your example, the mining town, incentivize businesses set up there, they're going to have good paying jobs, and ensure that that community doesn't just shut down and become a ghost town, that actually families are supported, the community is supported. You have a tax base there, both from the mines and from the workers. You want to maintain that.
Well, I want to ask about that because in his very first week of office, President Biden signed an executive order to create a working group to address transition, particularly the energy communities that were being affected. That working group is there. It's been there since the beginning. Like, they have been way out front on this. We now are talking about 9 million direct jobs in the United States as they're sucking all the investment jobs out of Alberta, where Danielle Smith said she didn't want them. There's 890,000 jobs in Texas. How important is it that we are able to compete with the prevailing wage, with apprenticeships, making sure that we have the incentives on the table to be able to hold our own as that investment money goes stateside?
That is the question, and we need to act. We need to act now. The blueprint has been laid. The investment, the dollars are going to go where the work is and where the tax credits are, and where there's a skilled workforce. Those are attractions for businesses. And we have a skilled workforce up here. Canadians are right across the country, want to go to work. They want the training that's required. But it's those apprenticeship opportunities that are going to be the key to not only prevailing wage, but if we want a future workforce, we're facing a skilled trade shortage in various parts of the country now, depending on what trade you're in. It's only going to get worse if we don't have apprenticeship requirements on these jobs.
I want to ask about that because I've had the great honor, IBEW 424 does amazing work for training, bringing people and bringing in young Indigenous. Certainly I've been at the building trades where they're training people up. We get lobbied all the time by all kinds of third parties who said, hey, give us the money and we'll train your workers. Can you tell us, are your workers ready? What is it, when we're talking about upskilling, who's the best to be able to make sure that those workers are moving into new sectors fully equipped and ready to go?
Well, I can tell you, thank you for the question. I can tell you that in the building trade, specifically I'll speak to the IBEW, our organization, we consider our completion rate, which is from the time a person starts their apprenticeship to the time they actually become licensed, we're in the 95th percentile. However, when you look at provincial studies across the country, those percentage rates only for hours during their apprenticeship on the job and hours in the classroom is less than 50%. So, I mean, our system works. We have employers that rely on our system because they tell us what they need for training, and we deliver it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen, for your insights. Colleagues, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing today. If you have any additional information you would like to share with the committee, please feel free to contact the clerk. And colleagues, we have another meeting lined up for Monday on the clean energy study. Is it the will of the committee that we can adjourn the meeting? Yes. Yes. Meeting adjourned.